Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for showing up this morning and to come to listen to Jess Milroy, who's going to be talking about mould and mycotoxins. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jess.
Thanks, Peter. Hopefully you'll be able to see me during this presentation. I'm not sure if you guys can. But anyway, I'll pop up at the end. Yeah, you can. Excellent. Okay, so my name's Jess. So I'm a functional medicine naturopath, and I've been working in the field for about 8 years now. And I myself actually started as a patient. So I wanted to go through and just share a little bit of my story before I get into the mold and mycotoxin information. Okay, so these are some of the pictures of when I was really sick. So I just wanted to also point out all of the diagnoses that I had received in the past. So definitely SIRS. But the original one was chronic fatigue syndrome, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which I know now is probably Bartonella, mold illness and SIRS, Lyme disease, Bartonella, mycoplasma, all the co-infections, systemic candida, probably also from all the antibiotics that I was given early on. I had full body sepsis from pneumonia. So I was undiagnosed with mycoplasma pneumonia for 18 months, so badly that I ended up with full body sepsis, which I'm sure did a lot of damage to a lot of my organs. Had Epstein-Barr, Raynaud's, POTS, fibromyalgia, anxiety, depression, PTSD from domestic violence, but also from medical PTSD as well, chronic anemia, and mast cell activation syndrome. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot and let you know I have been through a lot of what you guys have been through. So I feel you with a lot of your symptoms as well. So I'll give you a little bit of a backstory of what happened and what led to me actually getting mold illness, because I think this is pretty important for you guys to also understand how you can get SIRS, which is chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or the mold illness. It's not normally just mold exposure. There are other things that come into play. So I'm going to give you my backstory of how it all happened. So when I was a child, I had recurrent tonsillitis. So I had lots of antibiotics. I had Epstein-Barr virus, which gave me chronic fatigue syndrome by the age of 13. So this is all really early on in my life. So between the ages of, say, 2 years old, going on to 13, lots of antibiotics, very sick child. I started to have a couple of years where I was okay in my teens, and then unfortunately ended up in a domestic violence situation from the ages of 17 to 21. The reason that I wanted to bring that up is because trauma is quite a big piece that needs to be addressed when healing from mold, which I'll get into later. Then when I was in my 20s, we traveled around the world and I was administered multiple vaccines incorrectly. So I think it was about 8 vaccines, and they were supposed to be spaced 6 to 8 weeks apart, and my nurse gave it to me 2 weeks apart. Within 10 days of that, I had full-blown SIRS, but that's the whole another issue. Then we've traveled overseas. I'm not sure if I got bitten by a tick when we went to Thailand. I'm not sure what happened, but I slowly had this progression down into the mycoplasma, potentially Lyme, because I was getting the typical neck pain and everything by that stage. We were traveling for 6 months. I came back with that pneumonia that was undiagnosed for 18 months. When I came back, I went back to work and we moved into a house. At this stage, I was working in finance. I knew nothing of health. I knew nothing of mold. I was working in a really high stress environment, and we moved into a house with black mold. So that's what these 2 pictures are actually. I just wanted to show you an example of how old the house was, how dark it was. See how that tree is in front of the windows. And in the bottom picture, I'm not sure if you can see, but the very, very left-hand side of that picture, it looks like there's something draped over a cabinet. That was actually a massive tropical fish tank that was putting bucket loads of humidity into the air. So not only were we already moving into a moldy home, but we were actually making it a little petri dish for more to grow. And in that house, I actually had mold growing on our mattress. I didn't know. It was a very heavy latex mattress. Once the toxins get into latex, it spreads like wildfire. It was visibly on the walls. But if you don't know about mold, you know, when you're uneducated, you think, oh, I can clean that off. So I was cleaning it with no gloves, with, you know, bleach and all that sort of stuff. I got very, very sick in that house. That was the worst chronic fatigue that I ever had in my life. I basically could not function at all, couldn't get out of bed for more than half an hour at a time. I had to give up work. We had very little money. My husband was working at a bottle shop at night. So we had to start the healing process just with very, very basic things. I started with a bit of aromatherapy and teas. I then, actually, I forgot to put that in here, but I was so sick and I thought, I'm going to try anything. I went to see a naturopath. And they got my white blood cell count up by 50% in a matter of a month when nothing else had worked. That really piqued my interest and made me want to start studying naturopathy to heal my own body. Over time, I was able to get myself into complete remission naturally. I didn't have any medications at that stage at all. But after I went into remission, was fully qualified, then I went to Thailand and I was in a waterway and I was sitting in the waterway and I was absolutely covered with ticks. And within a day, I was covered with multiple bullseye rashes. And I was really sick very quickly and came back out of remission, obviously, because I had new infections. I knew all the stuff that I needed to do at that stage, healed myself back into remission. 1 year again after I was in remission again, we had, within a 2-month period, we had a family member die. At the same time, I was accidentally drugged. It was supposed to be CBD oil. I was given a very, very, very strong form of marijuana instead by accident, and it completely triggered mast cell in my body. One of my family members had multiple strokes and heart attacks. And at the same time, we bought our first home, and I didn't know at the time, and it was full of mold. So back in mold with all that trauma, all of that insult, inflammation to the body. And that's when I really started to get mast cell activation syndrome. It was a very, very intense time of our life. So I was sort of managing and trudging on through life. I ended up becoming a gut health specialist at the NIM clinic in Melbourne, for people who are familiar with that place. But one of my best friends actually became really sick from what we didn't know was mold at the time. And I put a lot of energy into finding out what was wrong with her, and we discovered mold illness. And that's when I started to notice all of my chronically ill patients that weren't responding to normal gut treatments or thyroid treatments or hormone treatments or whatever we were doing. I realized that there was this pattern of potential mold illness in all of them. So that's what really piqued my interest and started me down the environmental medicine and SIRS and mold path that I've been on for the last few years. So then, knowing that knowledge, I changed some of the environmental factors and continued to detox, and I lived a normal life. Then during the pandemic, I was locked in that house, which at the time I was coping with because I was going to work and getting breaks from the mold. But I was locked down in the mold for 24 hours a day for 2 years. And also our backyard had mold. So I literally could not get away from the mold for 2 years. Once we were allowed to leave our house, I got out and I actually was pretty much homeless for about 4 months. I was moving from place to place, trying to stay healthy whilst trying to maintain a work life. The stresses of the pandemic, having no home, working the 12-hour days with patients, and having the mold on top of that really took a toll on my body, and I completely crashed and entered burnout zone. This is when I headed to Cyprus for intensive treatment. So you guys can ask me at the end any questions that you want to know about the types of treatments that they do in Cyprus. But for me as a practitioner, I didn't have time to not be away from my patients healing in Australia, because we don't have access to some of the things easily or cheaply in Australia that we need to detox. So I headed to Cyprus for a 6-week intensive detox. I still came back quite sick, to be honest. So I decided for once, I started to treat myself as a patient, did some really deep detoxification here, incorporated some limbic retraining, which is nervous system retraining, some neurofeedback, and that's when I really started to get into completely healing, thriving. And yeah, I just wanted to share some of the fun pictures of the last couple of years that I've had, enjoying life again, getting back to full-time work. I mean, I have a full social life. I have a business and I'm doing everything that I've ever wanted to do. So I just wanted to reiterate to you guys that it might be a really rocky journey like this, but it is possible to heal. So now I wanted to share that message, and I wanted to share with you what you need to look out for and what you can do to help yourself thrive as well. All right, so now getting into the mold, because I think we've talked about my journey enough. You guys know me well now. All right, so one thing I just wanted to point out very, very quickly is the link to chronic fatigue and chronic health conditions and mold has to do with something called the cell danger response. So when there's a chronic stress on the body, so today we're going to be using mold as that example of the chronic stress, but it could be emotional, so trauma, it could be chemicals, so heavy metals or whatever. It can dysregulate our cells. The cells reduce the energy to deal with the stresses. So rather than being able to have energy for like normal life, it all gets put towards the bugs or the mold or whatever, causes chronic cellular dysfunction, and that's what leads to disease. So what we need to do when we have any chronic health condition is we need to go back to the first root cause and address this so that the cells can heal, and then everything else can heal in the body, so that you can return to full health. Okay, so I wanted to make a distinction between mold allergy and mold illness, because I think that this, especially in the mold community, in the medical community, is not really acknowledged. So mold allergy is the same as, say, if somebody had a peanut allergy or a grass allergy. They have hay feverish type symptoms. They might have hives, lots of histamine reactions. So it's that type of allergy that you're having. So when you go to the doctor and you suspect mold and they do mold testing, that's the normal kind of Medicare testing, they will normally do IgE antibodies. So that'll be this type of mold allergy, not looking for mold illness, which is a completely different thing. So that's some of the symptoms which you can go over later, but itchy skin, itchy eyes, red eyes, sneezing, stuffy, cough, a lot of that sort of stuff is more the allergy. Now, when we're talking about mold illness, this is chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So it is a multi-system, multi-symptom inflammatory illness. So the onset and duration is very different as well. So when we're talking about the mold allergy, which was the previous slide, that's quite instant. You'll be in an area and within a few hours, you'll start to have maybe not even, it could be minutes, you'll start to have those allergy reactions. You might be sneezing. When it comes to mold illness, some people are okay in the beginning, and as the mycotoxins, which are the mold toxins, start to build up in the system, they start to create all of these different symptoms that you see here. So this is the Shoemaker classification. It's called the biotoxin illness symptom clusters. So to work out on a very, very basic level, if you may have mold illness or CIRS, you need to have a look at all of these different clusters. If you have at least one symptom in at least 6 of these clusters, then it's pretty likely that you have CIRS. If you have 8 or more, then it's very high likely probability that you have CIRS. So this is a really good, if you guys want to take a screenshot or come back to this later, this is a really good way of just kind of screening yourself if this is a path that you want to go down. Okay, so there's another distinction that I wanted to make as well. So we have mold and then we have mycotoxins. So there are different types of mold. It's a type of fungus, and it loves to thrive in warm, damp, and humid conditions. So it can be found indoors and outdoors, and it uses its little spores to spread. It's not always black. This is where I actually really want to talk to, because everybody says, oh, I've got mold in my house, but it's okay because it's not the black type. But I've had patients who have had white mold who have been extremely sick. So I just wanted to mention it can be black, green, white, and other colors. Okay. And as I said, it reproduces and spreads with the spores, and there's some common locations, so bathrooms, kitchens, garage, and anywhere where there's water damage or high humidity. And it does like to feed on organic matters when they're breaking down. So if you've got a pile of leaves out the front of your house, it's breaking down, it could be releasing spores into the air. Okay, so the mold only generally releases mycotoxins when it needs to. So it's actually a chemical compound that is not essential for mold growth. So the mold can grow, it can release spores, but the release of mycotoxins is normally when there are multiple different types of molds that are living together. And it's a little bit of a competitive mechanism for them to kind of play the other types of mold. They'll release these mycotoxins into the air, and these are the things that are really toxic for the human body. So these are invisible to the naked eye, so you may not be able to see it. So I've put an example there that you may have, for example, black mold growing in your roof cavity, and the mycotoxins can actually come through the plaster. So you can't see it, but you can still get some of that contamination. So you may be able to smell it a little bit more with the mycotoxins, but not always. And it can contaminate food, crops, and indoor environments. So there are some types of foods that hold a lot of mycotoxins. For example, peanuts is really a food that can be high in aflatoxins. So is coffee. So when you're having a look at mycotoxins, you don't just want to think about what's going on environmentally, you want to think about what's going into your body as well. One really good example, and I just wanted to, before I forget to tell you about this, is coffee pod machines is quite a big one, because the coffee itself can hold mycotoxins. The machine can grow mold inside of it, and then on top of it, it's got the aluminium pod, which is another toxin. So that's just one example of one sort of food source that you could have a look at. Okay, so this is quite an emotional question. So why does SIRS occur in only some people? So you might have a husband and wife living together. I'll give an example. Me and my husband. Husband's thriving, living exactly the same circumstances. I am dying, right? So, and luckily I have a beautiful, supportive husband who has understood when I'm telling him something wrong, he believes it. But I know from my patients and talking to people that that is not always the case. That if, say the husband, if I didn't have such a great person by my side, goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't feel sick. I don't feel anything. I think it's all in your head. This is because there is a genetic susceptibility for some people to be more reactive to mold toxins and to become sick from the mold toxins. So the first difference is the inability to detox, so genetically or physically. So you may have heard of the HLA gene. So this is a particular gene which, if you have this gene, it is very hard for your body to detox out biotoxins specifically. So this could be from mold or Lyme. And then the MTHFR gene is just another example. There's a whole lot of genes, but the MTHFR gene makes it harder to flush things out of the liver. So that's a couple of reasons there. And so the picture on the right-hand side is a really good example of what's going on from that genetic susceptibility standpoint. So in a person who would end up with CIRS, they would have the exposure to the biotoxin, which would be the mold toxin. The immune system sounds the alarm. So that's the innate immune system. So let's just say that's like our warning bell system, right? And then we've got our other part of the immune system that actually takes action. So we've got the warning bell system going, hey guys, we need to do something about this. The active one is completely deaf, doesn't hear the signals, doesn't know what to do about it. At that same time, the biotoxins, so those mold toxins, they stay in the body, and then the first warning system keeps ramping up, and every time that keeps ramping up, it does increase the inflammation in the body as well. So after that, because the alarms have been sounded, nothing's happening, the biotoxins can pass from cell to cell. This is what creates the cell damage and the systemic inflammation, and it can also damage parts of the immune system. The cell damage and immune system dysfunction leads to that system-wide inflammation, so that multi-system, multi-symptom thing that we were talking about in the beginning. And then the inflammation causes multiple symptoms across the multiple systems, including brain atrophy. So a lot of the cognitive symptoms. So the easiest way to describe it is everything sort of halfway ramps up, not high enough to kill off or detox anything, but it goes halfway up and keeps going and never kind of shuts off. In people who have the genetic non-susceptibility, so they're able to clear the toxins, they have the exposure to the biotoxin, the alarm bells sound, the other part of the immune system goes, okay, we've got a problem, we need to deal with it, deals with it effectively, and then everything returns back to normal. So inflammation goes down, everything goes down. So instead of going up halfway, not dealing with it and continuing, it goes up, ramps right up, deals with it, goes right back down to normal functioning. So that's the difference from a genetic standpoint. And so it's about 25% of the population who will have the CIRS type of reaction. Some other things in terms of physical inability to detox would be chronic constipation, poor lymphatic flow. So especially when you're really tired, you're not able to move around. We actually need to physically move around or do things like infrared sauna to bring on that lymphatic flow to get toxins out. Inability to sweat. I don't think that I've had anyone with CIRS who sweats properly as yet until we actually start the detox. And then there's poor kidney or poor liver detoxifications, especially, and this is getting a little bit more technical, but one of the pathways called glucuronidation, which I can talk about in the end, what you can do there. Reason 2, that you have underlying infections or heavy metals burdening our detox pathways and our immune system so that we can't clear the toxins and are chronically inflamed. So a little bit of that toxic soup, if your body is already dealing with all of the toxins from over here and then you add more into it with the mold toxins, it just becomes a big inflammatory cascade. Some examples of that, of course, are Lyme and co-infections, parasites, candida, mercury and aluminium, etc. Trauma and limbic system dysregulation. So I cannot stress how many people, especially with mast cell activation, will also have limbic system. So that's our emotional system and nervous system dysregulation because they've had trauma or very, very chronic stress. So that's a big part of the development of chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And then the cell danger response, which I talked about before, which is the dysregulation of the immune system because of physical things that are happening in the body or the emotional body. Okay, so how do we figure out if mold is a factor? So first off, have a look around you. And this is not to take away from doing anything professionally, but first off, if you feel like looking at the CIRS symptom clusters, if you think, oh God, I actually do have quite a lot of these symptoms or I fit the cluster categorization, have a look around your house. It might not be very obvious black mold. It might be, for example, you might have that little bit of bubbling like in that picture that I've got there, a tiny little bit of water staining, because just in the bottom right picture, it might look like a tiny bit, but then you peel back something like some wallpaper and it's hiding underneath. So have a look for these little signs because it'll whisper before it screams at you when it comes to mold growth. So ask these questions. Can you see water damage staining? Can you see visible mold growth? Do you know of any leak that occurred in the house that that was rectified in less than 48 hours? When it comes to water leaking, if it's not completely dried out within 48 hours, you can pretty much guarantee that there's going to be mold growth, right? So if you've had a leak and then you have to wait till old mate comes 5 days later, it's too late. You have to get any leaks dried completely under 48 hours. Okay, so that's really important. Think back if there's been any issues like that in the house, because there's likelihood of mold growth. And obviously, does the house have a musty smell? Do you walk in there and does it just smell unfresh? That could be signs of hidden molds, releasing mycotoxins and volatile organic compounds into the air. So if you have any of these and you can see them straight away and you are symptomatic, then try and avoid these areas straight away, even before testing has occurred, because why expose yourself to something potentially toxic if you don't need to? And just a side note, it doesn't actually have to be your current home that's affected for you to have mold illness. It can be in your system for years, right? Because your body will want to protect your vital organs. It will take mycotoxins out of your bloodstream and it will set it into tissues. It'll go into your bile, in your gallbladder. So it could be sitting in your gallbladder. It could be sitting in your body fat for years, until you actively start to detoxify from it. So consider old places that you've lived in as well. Okay, so first off, I wanted to go through a couple of options of testing. So this is the only one that I would suggest in terms of home testing that I would have a look at. And this is actually the one that's recommended by Dr. Shoemaker. This is his favorite type of testing, if you guys are familiar with the Shoemaker protocol for mold toxicity. So the HERTSME-2 test, it has a look for the 5 most common molds that cause harm to human health. So you can see the list there. There's a couple of types of Aspergillus and definitely Stachybotrys. And then the Wallemia one is one, and I just wanted to add this in as a side note, it's one that's routinely found in air cons. So air cons can be a very big source of mold toxicity as well. So with this test, it involves collecting dust samples from the environment, and it's normally the 2 areas of the house that are used the most. Most of the time it'll be the living room and the main bedroom. And you can see in the top little picture that I have, it's a little attachment that goes onto your vacuum, and you actually have to get samples of the dust, and then the dust is sent off for analysis. So the pros of this particular test, it's very accurate for the areas that are tested, and it can be a very affordable way of assessing potential mycotoxin exposure. And again, it's good because Dr. Shoemaker, who is the mold expert, is a very big proponent of this test. The cons, it can miss specific areas of toxicity as it gives a general house score. So because you're taking a little bit from this room and a little bit from this room and evening it out, it doesn't actually tell you if the laundry, for example, is the moldy area, or if the bathroom is the moldy area, because it does have to be taken in carpeted areas. So if you've got any tiled areas, it's generally not a test that is used because it can't be on hard surfaces. Just a side note as well, you do need to consider your workplaces, as I said, air conditioners or HVAC systems, and your car as a source of toxicity. So I've had some patients who have only had mold toxins because of their workplace or because of their cars. So you do want to consider maybe having a look at testing in those areas. And not just mold, but there is actually a bacteria called actinomycetes, which is always a mouthful for me. I don't know why, I'll never get there. And that one can also feed into the toxic soup and loves to live alongside molds that create mycotoxins. So with the HERTSME-2 testing, you can see in the little bar graph, it gives you a reading at the end to say, okay, this is okay for people with SIRS, it's borderline, or it's not suitable for people living there. With that type of testing, you can also call the lab, which I've put the name of the lab there, the NSJ Sciences. You can call them and you can add on the actinomycetes bacteria for testing as well. Okay, so the other option for testing, and this is one that most of my patients will do because it is a lot more thorough, is getting a building biologist in. So it's a professional who can come into the house and map for moisture. Um, and that will determine the extent of the damage, water damage to the house. They can check air, dust, and surface sampling, which are then sent to the lab to be cultured and analysed, and then you end up getting a report to say what the findings were. They can use a boroscope. So those are, I'm not sure if you've seen them, but they're like a little scope, but they've got a big snake head on it, so they can get into pipes and things as well and check for mould in areas that you cannot physically see. And they can do thermal imaging to check for hidden mould and moisture as well. If they're a really great building biologist, then they can check for EMF and VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, so a different type of toxin that could be causing CRS flare-ups as well. So when looking for a building biologist, you need to make sure that they're accredited and really question them and ask them if they have an understanding of CIRS and they're not just mold inspectors, because I have, unfortunately, and I'm sure that they're meaning well, but I have had patients that have got mold inspectors into the house. They haven't done a thorough inspection, not understanding how serious CRS can be, have passed the house. Then we've got a building biologist in and the reports have come back as quite toxic. So you also want to look for a building biologist who does not do any of the remediating themselves. So they should only be doing the inspection and the analysis. And then from there, they can refer you to other professionals who can do the proper remediation in the space to make it safe for living. So the pros for a building biologist, they're extremely thorough and can differentiate between the rooms and spaces. So like I said, with the Hurts Me Too, you might get a little bit from the lounge room, you might get a little bit from your main bedroom. When it comes to building biology, they'll give you a report and say, these are the levels in the bathroom, these are the levels in the lounge room, these are the levels in the kids' room, whatever. So you can actually find out where the source of the mycotoxin exposure is, so you can get really specific with the remediation instead of going, oh my God, my whole house is contaminated, what am I going to do, sort of thing, especially if you're not in a position to sell the house. The cons, it can cost thousands of dollars seeing a building biologist. So it is a very expensive thing. It's only available if you've got I would say a minimum of about $600, can go up to $6,000 depending on the building biologist. Okay, so this is some types of testing. Where are we? Okay, yeah, no, that's okay. I was just checking I had all my slides there. Now going into testing, these are some of the tests that you can do on your body to see if mold is affecting you. So I wanted to include the shoemaker. So I've done 2 slides backwards. So I might go forwards and then I'll go back to this one. So patient testing. So you can do some of the shoemaker biomarkers. So these are blood tests that are done, and in Australia, the Naturopath Lab runs these. These are all of the markers that have a look at the different types of inflammation that can be set off in the body. So, for example, the MMP9, I think, is probably one of the most important ones. Each of these markers costs about $90. So doing all the shoemaker biomarkers is quite an expensive process. But just for example, if you could run something like MMP9, if you suspect that you have mast cell activation syndrome, this one can tell you if you have mold illness related to MMP9 inflammation. So it just tells us what type of inflammation that you have, so we can get really specific with treatment. So again, this is a blood test based on the shoemaker protocol. The other thing that Shoemaker really likes to check for, and this is what I'm going backwards to, is the Marcon's swab, which is a sinus swab for a type of bacteria, a type of staph bacteria that lives in the sinuses that could potentially make you more susceptible to mold illness because of the type of inflammation that it causes in the body. I personally have found, even in my clinic, if I don't do sinus protocols, my mold patients do not get better. So it is a staple in my clinic to not always test, because the test itself is $400. The treatment is about $40, so I don't always need to do testing, if we can just treat with no side effects anyway. The other test that's really affordable, if you just want to get a baseline and sort of track where you're at with your mold journey, is the VCS. So that's the visual contrast screening test. So you can look them up online. It's about $15 to do this test. And basically it's an online test, and it's testing to see how much the biotoxins have affected your visual field. So a lot of people with CIRS will also have issues with their vision. So this is a really good tool for if you don't have enough money to do the other testing, or if you want a way of kind of tracking your progress through treatment. You can get that as a baseline before you start treatment, and then do it, you know, every month or every couple of months, just to make sure that your score is improving. So what it'll do is it'll tell you in the left eye and the right eye whether you've passed or failed, and it'll give you a percentage score. If you're under a certain percent, you'll fail, and that's biotoxin illness. If it's over a certain percentage, then you're relatively in the clear. Okay, so this is getting down to the nitty-gritties with testing. So this is having a look at the mold testing and mycotoxin testing. So the organic acids test is one that gives us clues towards mold illness. So it has a look at some of the fungal toxins. So if you have a look, it's got intestinal microbial overgrowth, and it's got a couple of the markers in there that will show aspergillus, but it's really kind of limited to aspergillus. But if you don't have enough money to do all testing, you want to have a look at your gut and potential for candida and mold, this is a really good place to start. The one that's a lot more specific is the mycotoxin panel. So that one, so both of these are done as urine tests. The mycotoxin panel will have a look for the major mycotoxins and will give you a level at where they're at. And also it'll tell you each of the body systems that that mycotoxin is potentially affecting. All right, now when it comes to treatment, first and foremost is reduce exposure. So I cannot stress this enough. Before you think about all of the other things, you have to think about reducing exposure. So it might be moving premises or moving rooms. Unfortunately, this is a really difficult one. You can't get better if you're still constantly getting those toxins into your system at the rate that you had been. So if possible, move premises, or if you can't move, try and move to a space in the house that has less contamination or no mold growth until you can get things fixed. And this may also include getting rid of items that have been contaminated. So I've put a little chart up on the right-hand side of porous and non-porous materials. So if you know that you've been living in a moldy house, you may need to get rid of fabrics, wood, leather, gyprock, unsealed furniture, because the mycotoxins and the mold can get embedded into those materials, and you can't actually clean them off. When it comes to non-porous materials, those one you can generally clean. So using appropriate things to clean with, some examples would be bicarb and vinegar, which is actually a really underrated way of cleaning, using HEPA vacuums. There are a couple of good examples, and there's some really good products on the market as well that you can use to clean with. So if you can't move, like I said, you do need to fix the problem properly. So you can't just paint over mold. You can't just clean it off and paint it. For example, if it's in plaster, you need to have it cut out, and you need to physically remove the plaster and then have that portion replastered. Don't just paint over it, because it will still affect you. Old dead mold can still make you sick when you have CIRS. So you need to physically remove that out of the space. The use of HEPA air filters, especially if they've got a carbon filter on there, is incredible for reducing mold exposure in the air via the spores. So I would highly recommend, if you suspect that you're having any sort of exposure to toxins, get an air filter. It can really make a big difference to your health. On top of that, using a dehumidifier to reduce the humidity will stop as much mold growth from occurring in the first place. So going back to root cause medicine, even when it comes to your house, root cause could be humidity levels. So we want to look at dehumidifying the house. We're aiming for a humidity level of about 45 to 55. So you can actually get a cheap humidity reader. I just got mine from Amazon for about $20 and it works amazingly. So you want to keep an eye on your humidity levels. Washing machines are areas that are missed a lot of the time. So you've got to think about your clothes, your sheets, everything that you're wearing and putting on you. If it's contaminated with mold, you're going to be running that. You're going to be feeling that after running all your clothes through with the toxins. So you need to make sure that you're aerating your washing machine. Top loaders are a better type of washing machine for not getting mold growth in, because they don't have that rubber lip around the outside. So yeah, even when you've got the top loader, leave it open to always aerate out. But if you are washing your clothes and you suspect that you have mycotoxins and you can't afford to get rid of them, or you don't want to get rid of them, which I don't advise, I do advise that you get rid of contaminated clothes. But if it's a small amount of exposure, you want to wash properly, get things like borax, eucalyptus, vinegar, EC3 laundry, and pop it into your washing machine to wash with your clothes to get rid of the mycotoxins and molds. And then when you're cleaning your showers, this is the other thing that can cause mold growth that I really wanted to point out. When you're cleaning your showers and other wet areas that have waterproofing in them, you need to only clean with vinegar and bicarb, because other products can erode the waterproofing in these areas. So a repeated use, it can degrade those areas over time and make it more a susceptible area for mold growth. And also, bleach doesn't do the trick. It does not kill mold, just FYI. Okay, so now when we're looking at detoxification from mold, the first thing is we need to make sure that all of your drainage channels are open for allowing the mold to come out. So this is a really important part of your healing. So I do really highly recommend that you work with a practitioner when it comes to doing this part of your treatment, because it can be a little bit dicey when you start doing mold detoxes with how you're feeling. So it is nice to have somebody to guide you. But I did want to give just a few examples of some things that you could do to help you along the way that you can discuss with your practitioner. To decrease the MMP9 levels, which is a very, very likely inflammatory marker for you to have high when you've had high exposure to mold, especially if you've got mast cell activation syndrome. High-dose fish oils are really good. So even just the really good quality fish oil can make a lot of difference with the systemic inflammation from mold. Like I said, you need to do some sort of a sinus protocol due to the potential for MARCoNS. So you can do things like colloidal silver nasal spray. EDTA is a bit more intense because it's going to open up the biofilms in the nose, which are like the little shields that the bacteria create around themselves, so it can release a lot of toxins. Xylitol is another biofilm buster, and grapeseed extract. So they're some of my go-tos for cleansing out the nose. You absolutely need to make sure that you're passing at least 2 stools a day, minimum 1, because that's a way that we get the mycotoxins out of the body, because there's no point in using things like binders, binding them all up, and then they just sit there recirculating. So we have to get your bowels moving. So having a look at things, if you initially can't move your bowels, a little bit of a cleanse to take the edge off might be water enemas, might be colonics, it might be coffee enemas as well. Coffee enemas are some of my favorite things to use in clinic, which actually I'm talking about later in the liver section. Magnesium oxide. So magnesium oxide is a special type of magnesium that brings moisture to the bowel, so it softens the stool and makes it easier for excretion. The other thing is also having a look at your diet and just making sure that you're eating enough fiber. I can't really understate how important it is to eat your fiber because, for example, even something really cheap and easy like a psyllium husk, it can bind to mycotoxins in your bowel. right? So you could take some psyllium husk every day, but there are free apps that you can download on your phone. One that I use all the time is MyFitnessPal. You can download that, track what you're eating, and you can check and see if you're eating about 25 grams of fiber in your diet every day, and that will help with the excretion of the toxins. You want to make sure that you're opening up your lymphatic system, so proper hydration. Now, when I'm saying proper hydration, I mean drinking enough, but drinking also good quality water that doesn't have all the contaminants and heavy metals in there as well. So drinking at least 2 liters of filtered water every day is really important. You can also have a look at infrared saunas and ionic foot baths for drainage in the lymphatic system. And actually, one I forgot to put on there that is a really easy one and can give you a little bit of exercise as well is one of those rebounder trampolines. So, you know, the little round rebounders, do a few minutes on that every day, and that's like a pump for the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system, it needs movement to start moving apart from when you're in the sauna. So that's a really easy one as well. All right, so you also need to support your liver detoxification. So, and a couple of at-home things that you can do are cast oil packs. So that's where you just use some castor oil on, you can actually buy proper castor oil packs that are like things that you attach to your abdomen, and then you put a hot pack over the top. The castor oil is, because it can pass through our skin, it can go to the liver and help to detoxify the liver, reduce inflammation. Now, coffee enemas has a really special place in my heart when it comes to mold, because what coffee enemas do is they're not only flushing the bowel, but they're actually triggering the liver to release something called glutathione, which you might have heard of. It's our master antioxidant in the body, but it's also something that can help to flush out mycotoxins really specifically. So coffee enemas are really good. Epsom salt baths, very, very helpful. The sulfate component of the Epsom salts can help to flush out the mycotoxins. And then having a look at things from a supplement perspective, like B vitamins, especially if you have something like the MTHFR gene mutation. TUDCA, this is a really amazing bile salt. So like I said in the beginning, mycotoxins can get trapped in our bile. So when we try to start detoxing, it can be very hard to shift that bile out of our gallbladder, because our body doesn't want to release a whole lot of toxins back into the body. So by taking bile salts like TUDCA or like ox bile, we're actually helping to replenish our bile stores and helping to slowly move out some of those old toxins from the bile in our gallbladder. And then glutathione, you can take a liposomal supplement, or you can also get it intravenously if you're working with your doctor. Oxygenation, having a look at your oxygen levels and making sure that your blood quality is really good is a very important part. So when you go through mold illness, it can actually affect the thickness of the blood. It can actually become a bit more thicker, and it makes it harder for the body to oxygenate. So having a look at things like fish oils to thin the viscosity or the thickness of the blood is really good. And then ozone. I wish we had more access to this in Australia. This is one of the reasons that I went to Cyprus and got treatment over there. But ozone is basically a type of oxygen gas that is extremely healing for the body. In Australia, there are a couple of colonic clinics that you can go to for rectal insufflation, where they actually use the ozone gas rectally. When it's inserted rectally, it can go to the portal vein in the liver, and that can actually get into the bloodstream quite quickly. So if you can't have access to ozone or 10 pass, which is the type that I had overseas, where they take your blood out, they cleanse it, they put the ozone back in, and they put it back into your body. This is kind of the closest thing that we can get access to in Australia, apart from one doctor in Sydney who does a little bit of ozone work in the blood. But it can be quite an expensive process. I had a patient do the Sydney one, and it ended up costing him about $100,000 in treatment. So it's a little less attainable that way. Adrenal cocktails. Now, this is such a simple little thing that you guys can implement, and because there can be an imbalance in one of the hormones called antidiuretic hormone, which makes us feel extremely dehydrated, it can make you feel dizzy, it can make you feel like you need to pee all the time. This is one of the really simple things that you can do at home using food as medicine to counteract what's going on with the antidiuretic hormone and help to reduce that chronic dehydration, help your adrenals to heal from the stress of the illness. So it's literally orange juice, a little pinch of cream of tartar, which you get from the baking aisle, or coconut water for a bit of potassium. The orange juice is for vitamin C. Celtic sea salt, you mix that up, drink it, Bob's your uncle. That's it. And I cannot tell you how healing that has been for some people. As an initial, if you don't have money, please start with an adrenal cocktail. It makes a difference. It really does. The potassium helps with kidney flushing as well. So it's a really good example of food as medicine. So to increase MSH, so this is something that if you have from mold illness, things like chronic insomnia, you know, you've got ruminating thoughts at nighttime. There's one which I'll mention here, but I'm not allowed to prescribe it, so just take that as you will. There's a peptide called KPV, which is really good at counteracting the effect of what's happening with MSH in the body and can help people with mold illness, if they have insomnia, actually heal and get proper sleep. The other things to consider there is, especially at nighttime, orange or red lighting only. In my house, we have salt lamps everywhere. Putting on your blue light blocking glasses and really sticking to sleep hygiene. So block out curtains, making the room as dark as possible, because that is going to feed back into the body healing. And from a dietary perspective, the low amylose diet can be very helpful at or reducing mold laden foods. So have a look at the low amylose diet for reducing inflammation. You normally only do that for a couple of weeks to 4 weeks maximum. And the low mold diet. So like I said earlier, the aflatoxin rich foods like peanuts, grains, coffee, you can look that up very easily online. When having a look at binders, if you do end up getting some testing done, there are some specific binders that hit specific mycotoxins. Some of my favorites to start with are Saccharomyces boulardii probiotics. So that's a really accessible, cheap probiotic that you can get. It can bind to mycotoxins and it can also help gut health. Now, the only caveat with that is it is a probiotic yeast. So if you do have a yeast intolerance, you may have a reaction. But normally starting between that and the clays, I find a little bit easier to start with. When you're working with a mold literate doctor, they may prescribe something like cholestyramine or Welchol, which are bile sequestering agents. So again, going back to the gallbladder, it's sucking out that toxic bile out of the gallbladder so you can heal. All right, just as a side note, when talking about treatment, having mast cell activation can make it a little bit harder. So this, from more of a symptom perspective, if you haven't had a diagnosis, you may find that you might be the person that it doesn't matter what you take, your body reacts to it. You're really sensitive, you might need tiny little doses of things, or you just literally can't take anything at all. You react to everything in your environment. It might be a mast cell activation syndrome. I have not had one patient yet who has had MCAS who also hasn't needed to treat their nervous system. I heard a mold doctor once call it PTSD of the nerves of the immune system, and I 100% agree. You do, as part of needing to heal your mast cells, calming down the body out of fight or flight is going to help you to be able to detox better. It's going to help your immune system to be able to heal better. So treating the mast cells might be a necessary part of your treatment before you go into all of the other detoxification avenues as well, if you suspect you might be one of those patients. So some of the things that you might be able to use as mast cell stabilizers is Claritine, which is the drug name is loratadine, Zyrtec, or sodium chromoglycate if you're working with a doctor. Some natural options is nettle. Nettle is a mast cell stabilizer, so it's a kidney detoxifier, it's a nourisher, so even nettle tea, starting with nettle tea every day can be a beautiful way of treating. Quercetin calms down the mast cells as well. DAO helps you to break down excess histamines in the body, and then there's a herb called Bicol skullcap, which I find an integral part of my MCAS treatment for patients. So again, you need to do this alongside a practitioner and also do limbic training. I forgot to put this in here, but doing the limbic training. which I've mentioned here. These are some of the programs or modalities that you can use to heal that part of the nervous system. So if you've got a lot of medical trauma, if you've had other traumas in the past, and then this is a hit off the CIRS cascade, then I really, as part of your mold illness journey, would suggest that you do one of these things as well. So that's the end of my presentation. So if you want to work with me, I've just popped up my details there. I've also got on my website, and it is a work in progress because it takes a lot of time to do this, but my website, I've got free at-home detox information. I've got information about testing. You can book for a consultation on there, and there's also mold-specific detox products on there too. But like I said, go on there for the free at-home detox information. And you can also email me or find me on Instagram or Facebook on that handle. So anyway, I hope you guys got a lot out of that talk because I've been talking for a long time. So Peter, you can jump back in anytime now.
Jess, that was brilliant.
Thank you.
It certainly covered so much. And things that probably many people didn't even think about. I was making some notes down there myself.
Oh, good.
So does people have some questions? There was one in the chat, but I've certainly got some other questions to that. Do you want me? I can read out one.
Yeah, go for it.
The mold and the mental health side was raised in one of the questions, and I guess you could answer that and sort of, I would say yes. If you've got mold, then your brain is affected.
100%. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, because you've got to understand from an inflammatory perspective, it is going to be inflaming parts of the brain that will regulate our mood. It can change our gut dysbiosis. So I'm sure you guys would have heard the gut is the second brain. If your gut's not okay, then your mental health is not going to be okay. So mycotoxin and mold exposures, it can actually kill off some of our good bacteria, which is going to feed back into that cascade as well. It can also cause a dysregulation of something called zonulin. So zonulin is a protein in the body that causes leaky gut. So the outside of our gut lining is normally nice and tight like this, and it opens up a little bit to let nutrients through. But what happens is when we have, and I'm sure you went through this in the gut talk, but it can open up too much when it becomes leaky. It can let little bits of toxins through into the bloodstream. We have the same mechanism in the brain, right? So that upregulation of zonulin from the mycotoxins, it can let little bits of toxins and inflammatory particles that shouldn't be allowed into the brain cross through the blood-brain barrier. Once there are toxins in there, of course, our brain's going to be dysregulated. So there's that portion from a physical perspective, but then mental health, it's all of these things that you're feeling from a physical perspective. When people aren't receptive to what you're feeling, you feel like you're going crazy, told you have anxiety, told you have this, told you have that. So I think it's a bit of a chicken and an egg when it comes to the mental health side of things.
Yeah. And that's where you get the medical trauma comes in, when you're gaslit all the time by people. So it just adds to it. Interesting that you've mentioned the gut, because like there's that old adage where everybody says that, all disease starts in the gut. I think we're finding that probably many diseases, the gut is affected. It may not start in the gut. Exactly. So you're sort of indicating that mold and mycotoxins then can change the gut microbiome. And then you've got the added issue on top of a changed gut microbiome, which has its own complications in itself. So you could be hit with a double whammy once you've got mold and mycotoxin issues. Yeah. You then get gut issues. So the cause of the gut issues was the mold and mycotoxins. And then you've got the dysbiosis of the gut adding extra complications as well, which could give you similar kinds of symptoms too. So
Exactly. And this is why when I was working as a gut specialist at NIM, I started to notice these patterns in my patients that weren't getting better. And then I realized, okay, yeah, disease starts in the gut, but because of bloody mycotoxins. So, it goes back even a step further.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. One of my first questions when you were sort of saying it took you so long to get diagnosed was, why does it take so long for so many of us to get a proper diagnosis with all of this? What's going wrong?
I think for the most part, when people are trained in the medical field or the medicalized version even of naturopathy as well, we are taught to be thyroid specialists, or like I said, gut specialists, or this or that. We're not looking at the broader environment. We're not looking at the person as a whole person. We're not looking at all of their body systems at once. And we're not thinking about, okay, if this is happening, if something's happening in the head or the nerves, you go to a neurologist and they're going to look at it from their lens. And then and then your thyroid's out, so you go to an endocrinologist and they're looking at it from their lens. So I think it is a misdiagnosis because they're not talking to each other, right? So that's the other thing. The ego of the professional comes into it. They're not wanting to work together. They're not wanting to work in a team, but also they're not wanting to look at the broader environment to figure out what could be affecting this patient.
Yeah. I'll have to add to that, though, that so many mainstream practitioners are simply completely unaware of mold and mycotoxins.
Oh, absolutely. Even I was. I mean, when we went to uni, not one mention of mold, literally not one.
Yeah. Although it's outlined in the Bible.
Yeah.
So it's been around for ages. People have kind of known about it, but don't think that it's very serious. And I guess you raised the point too that only about 25%, was it, of people can get symptomatic to the mold.
Correct. Yeah.
Whereas what's interesting when you sort of said that the remaining don't get symptomatic at that point of time, but they could down the track. So us kind of being canaries in the coal mine could save us long term, I suppose, because we become more conscious of it to begin with.
Right. I actually did have it. I've got a good example of that. I had a patient who ended up with kidney cancer, and we couldn't figure out why his partner had CIRS. And I didn't know any of this. And then when I started asking about the family, then figured out, oh, it's actually the house that you guys are living in together. We did mold testing, mycotoxin testing, and it was the particular type of mycotoxin that causes renal cancer. So that canary in the coal mine thing is very accurate.
Yeah, so people are sort of being eaten away from the inside without even realising it, and it's due to mould, mycotoxins. We won't add tick infection to this particular talk, but certainly many people, though, of course, have got tick infection stuff, do need to consider the mould as well, because their immune system is now compromised, and so they're intolerant to so many things.
Correct, and it feeds into the same inflammatory pathways. It's just adding to that toxic soup that makes us sick.
Yeah, so I guess someone like yourself having this experience now from, I guess you're far more experienced now and also have experienced it yourself.
Yeah.
That's where I found if practitioners have gone through hell and high water with their health too, they're much more curious and they're much more open and much more believing of so many of their patients as well.
Yeah.
And they can think broader and, as you said, think holistically too. How can we... And I guess years ago when they sort of took, naturopaths off the list of private health insurance, we should try and fight to get that back, because
I agree.
Not all of them are the same. I think the experience and the training has come a long, long way that they could fill a huge gap within the medical profession. But they've been, I guess, belittled a little bit because they haven't been included now.
That's right.
So that's another advocacy area that we can bring back. But certainly what you presented here, many doctors would not even know about.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because there could be so many people that could be helped with a little bit of education.
Yeah. Well, something when a kid goes in there and the mum says, oh, he can't breathe and he's coughing and wheezing and so forth, you've got asthma. Well, he's ventilated. Well, hang on, let's take a step back from that. Why has he got the asthma?
Yeah.
Tell us about your home. I mean, they're questions that are never really asked.
Yeah, well, a perfect example is I actually had a patient the other day, a 5-year-old boy, not sleeping, big behavioural issues, chronic anxiety, did a mycotoxin test off the charts, started treating him with binders, and he is sleeping well. His behaviour is so much better. So, even behaviourally, not even those respiratory symptoms.
Yeah. And I bet that he would have gone to doctors and they would have either shook their head or given them certain drugs, and it still never fixed the problem as well.
Yeah, they just said it's a behavioural thing for his age.
Okay, yeah. So it's kind of normal but not normal.
Yeah, exactly.
Has anybody else got any more questions? You can put them in the chat, or you're welcome to jump in and ask Jess. We've got a comment here. Someone saying that the stressful symptoms are metallic mouth with mild respiratory discomfort. Can you suggest anything for the relief of the metallic mouth taste? I'm in a strict mould detox for the past 10 weeks or so and have seen much improvement. Removed themselves from the source of the problem, which was rising damp and water leak downstairs. So what would you suggest with that? Is that, would you do the zinc test for that metallic taste thing? Would that be one thing you would probably look at?
I'd be having a look at all of the minerals. So I really like the mineral test, the oligo scan. I find it to be the most accurate. So having a look at all of your minerals, particularly the zinc, would be a place to start for sure. Yeah.
And so an oligo scan, I know, is something that's relatively new, and a few people, and I've had that done before, but I can tell you what, it really matched quite accurately with a hair test, which I had done about the same time.
Yeah.
And that was quite interesting. So even though it's sort of like a device you simply put on your hand and sort of like Star Trek where it just measures that,
yeah,
you can get back a reading instantaneously about your levels of toxic metals and so. Do you want to go a bit further?
Exactly.
What an oligo scan is? And
I would love to. I'm a huge proponent of these. Yes. So
and you have one and use it with your clients as well?
I don't have, but I refer to one of my friend practitioners to do the test.
Good, because you're all online, aren't you, now? You're seeing people
I am all online, yeah, because most of my patients are now interstate, so I was sitting on Zoom for most of the day anyway. So with an oligo scan, yeah, so it's using a laser that's reading your tissues to see where your heavy metals and mineral levels are, as well as some of your vitamins. But the reason that I prefer this type of testing over the hair testing is people with very poor detoxification channels may not be pushing heavy metals into the hair follicle for reading, right? So with the oligo scan using the laser on the active tissues, you can see what's actually in the tissues, not just what the body's able to be pushing out into the hair.
Okay.
Yeah.
That kind of raises another question about excreting. With urine testing, should you do a challenge test with that? Should you do one test without the challenge and then another test with a challenge by using the things that sort of bring that out?
I only recommend using an infrared sauna if you're going to be doing testing, because even though things like glutathione will bring it to the surface, it can actually nullify some of the mycotoxins on the test. So you'll get a negative reading, but only because the glutathione has changed the structure of the mycotoxin, so it's not able to pick it up in the testing. So yeah, prior to testing, I generally say infrared sauna or some sort of lymphatic movement so that you can pee it out that way. Yeah.
Okay, so you're sort of challenging it in some respects. You're not using chemical challenge, but you're using a lymphatic drainage and pushing it out of the tissues.
Yeah.
And you do something similar when you want to try and get the best testing as well. You either test yourself on the worst day and or do these challenges beforehand as well.
Exactly.
You did mention movement. I did make a note about that. And so many people with chronic fatigue syndrome have been told not to exercise. I think, and I think in some respects, trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater might not be the best thing, because I think we all need to move in some way, shape or form. But I guess we need to move within our tolerance limits, not aerobically move too much. I think aerobic movement is some of the worst.
Yes, I agree.
But to try and move our lymph system in some way. You mentioned the, what's quite interesting, you mentioned the bouncy, what is that? The
rebounder, yeah, if you've got capacity, yeah, of course.
I don't have the aerobic capacity. I actually did get one years ago and I was able to go on it, but as I've worsened, I switched to having a vibration platform.
Yes, oh yes, yeah, they're great.
And that's another way that you can do that for a short period of time without getting out of breath so much, but you are moving your lymph system around. So that's just another idea. And they're quite cheap. I mean, Amazon's about $100, $120 or something for that. And you can just, as you sit there watching telly, you just have it underneath your feet. Yeah. And that's another way to move the lymph. So all of these things are important. You did bring up quite a lot of things that people can do at home that are sort of cheap to do as well without having to go a lot of expense.
Yeah.
Has anybody got any more questions? It's all quiet there on the home front. Well, you have covered a lot. I think you've taken up so much of your time as well. I really hope that so many people can watch this afterwards. We'll certainly promote people to watch this afterwards. I'm going to watch it again. There's a lot there that we could do. I might take some notes from it to make it easier for people too. So before we go, is there anything else as well? I've got another message down there. Oh, how accurate is the VCS testing? That's a good question.
Look, it's okay, I would say, because the thing is, if people already have any issues with their eyes, that's also going to be a factor. If they've already got some sort of eye fatigue going on for non-biotoxin related issues, that's a factor. And also it depends on how your computer is calibrated as well. So it's all right, but I literally only use that if somebody cannot afford anything else, to be honest.
Yeah. And there's a couple of places online you can do it. I think it's a cheap cost to do. But you're absolutely right in regards to the computer. Being an ex-photographer myself, we have to have our computer monitors absolutely sort of spot on to be able to, what we see is what we get. And different people have different sort of colours from that and different contrasts. So, yeah, there's going to be some variability there. Yeah. That we're looking at to get this into optometrists who are aware of this concept and actually have sort of charts that you could actually look at. The only thing is you make sure over a period of time to replace them so they don't fade as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is.
That would be good.
It is. I think if optometrists was aware of that too. But you're right, if people have already got eye problems, then it could give false readings. But maybe the fact they could have eye problems is because of the mold and mycotoxins.
Exactly. So. Yeah, chicken and an egg situation with that one.
It is. Yeah. But I think the more tools that we have and the more we know, the more we sort of hope we have of saying, look, I just hate the thing where people said, I've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, I've been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and there's nothing we can do. I think that's one of the worst things you can say to people. Say, look, yes, you need to rest. Yes, you need to pace. Yes, you need to stick within your own tolerance levels. But let's investigate so many more things. And I think, a great naturopath like yourself can look at broader things that a lot of doctors are missing. So I think more people should be putting naturopaths on their list of people to investigate for themselves.
I know I'm biased, but I agree.
Well, I love speaking to so many different people and I learned so much myself as well, but I am definitely finding, the good naturopaths, especially those that have had their own illness journey, they're the ones that are most experienced in this and the most understanding about this, like yourself.
Yeah.
Jess, I think we'll call it a day. Thank you so much for putting this presentation together. I know that would have taken a lot of time. And thank you for your time today with all of this. It's been brilliant.
Oh, you're so welcome. I just hope that you guys got a lot out of it. And yeah, like I said, feel free to reach out after the fact with my contact details there and just ask anything that you need to.
Yeah. I'll put this up on our YouTube channel soonish. Yeah. So I've looked over this and got it up there, but I'll also put your details there on as well. So other people in the future can view that and contact you.
Sounds good.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Jess. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Thanks so much. And we'll see you again. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.